Hello, sharks. Today, I'm here with a pitch for the American people. I'm going to build something really harmful to the environment, make a ton of money in the process, and you're going to pay for it. In exchange for your investment, I'm offering you 0.0% of my company. Who's in? Uncle Sam, I see you're interested.
Welcome to Political Playlist.
All right, are we ready, guys?
Happy Hour.
Happy hour.
We fucked that up so bad.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Political Playlist Happy Hour. I'm Michael Kristoff.
I'm Anna Muskie-Goldwyn.
And as always, playlisters, we are bringing you into our group chat about politics and the next generation of political leaders in this country. And on today's happy hour, we are discussing how to talk about data centers, and particularly the one that Shark Tank's very own Mr. Wonderful is trying to build in Utah at the taxpayers' expense.
I just have to say, I find him so annoying. Like I find him annoying in like a non-political way where I'm just like, I just don't like listening to him talk, regardless of what he's saying.
Yeah, I would
like
agree.
Even if he was saying things that I agreed with, I don't think I would like listening to him talk.
Do you feel like he's that, like he seems like he's such an asshole, but not like a funny asshole. You know,
Right.
like those people who are like, oh, well, this guy's an asshole, but he's kind of funny.
Yeah,
he's
he's
like
not
making a lot of
he's not
sense.
like the life of the party kind of like.
No,
He
just really.
I would say that if you
really-
looked up the definition in the dictionary of mansplainer, he would come up.
Yes. So I feel like this is one of those things that a lot of people are hearing this word data center buzzed around. It's kind of becoming a hot button political issue. And we thought it'd be fun to really discuss this from a couple of different perspectives. One, using this Kevin O'Leary proposed data center that he's trying to build in Utah as a good jumping off point, but then broadening that out to, okay, what is the real impact of these data centers? Because I feel like the thing that is totally unbeknownst to a lot of people who maybe don't follow politics all that much, or, you know, keep hearing AI buzzed about, but like maybe haven't really tried ChatGPT or Claude. Or any of these, you know, it's like there's kind of a disconnect about what does it mean to have a data center in your area, in your town, in your state.
I would say, what does it mean to have a data center in general? Like, I think, yeah. There's obviously the local impact, but then I think there's also the quantifiable thing that none of us can quite wrap our heads around yet, which is just the magnitude of computing power that is becoming necessary in this new age of AI. So it's pretty wild.
Well, Kevin O'Leary is trying to build a data center called Stratos, and it's a massive AI data center complex in Box Elder County, Utah. And he is planning to have this built on 40,000 acres of land. And the project is projected to basically use around 9 gigawatts of power. So that would exceed the entire state of Utah's current power usage.
I think it's that it would consume more than twice the electricity of the state.
Twice. Okay. Wow. Well, that is, I think, a great place to begin. And we are talking about a data center that is also going to use an enormous amount of water in a state that is suffering from a serious drought. It is a state that has a very fragile ecosystem. The projections on this data center say that it's going to raise the temperature, and I want to get this right here, basically increase the state's CO2 emissions by roughly 55 to 75%, use billions of gallons of water per year in a state that is already in a drought and has seriously stressed ecosystem with the Great Salt Lake. The Great Salt Lake is in real trouble. And it is going to raise the average temperature of the region at night, 12 degrees, and during the day, 5 degrees.
Whoa.
So, yeah, from
It
all of
also
the
it also is being built in an area, I'm just gonna add this in there, that it's being built in an area that is not only dominated by the ranching industry and will wipe out a significant portion of that, but is also a sanctuary for migratory birds. And I know that that sounds kind of crunchy granola, but I don't think that people realize how important the migration patterns of birds in the United States are for like all ecosystems in terms of what they kind of carry back and forth and the patterns of it. So kind of adding that into the environmental impact, I think, is an important thing to note.
Totally. Basically, this proposal from Kevin Leary is asking for federal and state taxpayers to fund this project. It's being pitted as a competitive national security driven, we have to do it to compete with China sort of thing. And I think what's notable on it as well is that this is where this is in the process is that it has cleared the local and county commission, who apparently it's a commission of 3 people that voted unanimously to approve this. And then they also changed the law so that if you want to object to it now, you have to pay a fee in order to file an official complaint or petition against it. Yes. So they've basically created a paywall for opposition to this
Wow.
project,
Well,
which is kind of insane.
And to add to those numbers, like just to put in contrast, there's 3 people making this decision. It was reported that 600 people attended that commission hearing, and there were another 300 people outside chanting "No data center" and "We want water." So when you talk about the 3 people who have the power to change it versus the almost 1,000 people locally who came to oppose it, it's pretty wild to think about the fact that now these people, unless they want to pay that fee, are not really going to have an opportunity to voice their concerns.
Yeah. So one playlister who we cover on this platform, Blake Moore, who's a congressman from Utah, Republican, very, a conservative guy, but I think we've seen him to be a very more traditional conservative. I think he is a little less MAGA than others in his
I think
party.
he also I will say has like a bend towards a conservative approach to environmentalism. I think being from Utah, that he's sponsored a lot of bills that have to do with like forest legislation and talking about national parks and things like that and preserving these important pieces of land. So I do think that the environmental impacts of things, despite him being a conservative, is something that he has his eye on.
Yeah, totally. And I think that, given all that, kind of explains his position here. So he hasn't really taken one, interestingly enough. He's really tiptoed around this. He just only recently commented on this. And I guess a lot of these of some of these county workers and commissioners who approved all this have been getting some threats, and there's been some protests and whatnot against them. And he kind of came out and said, made a statement on that saying we can't have any violence or vitriol against, elected officials. He has come out as far as the project and said he wants to make sure that this is done in a smart way and that he wants to work with local officials and make sure that this isn't obviously depleting the state of vital resources and not a burden on the state, while also making sure that we're helping advance our national security and competitive tech edge interests. And he called out the fact that Utah is actually, when it comes to military and national security development, Utah has always played a role in that, whether it's with military installations there, whether it's with just equipment testing, etc. So it sounds clear,
That's a little
Anna.
soft.
like this guy is really doing a great job at political gymnastics and not at
Yeah.
all taking
I
any
think this
side
is like an
whatsoever.
example of inner conscience trying to leak
Mhm.
its way through the kind of political necessity of playing ball with these larger interests at
Yeah.
hand. So
Um, a couple other elements to this that I think are noteworthy that um, the project passed the local and county commission. It still has to go through the Utah Division of Air Quality, the Division of Drinking Water, the Division of Water Quality, and the Division of Water Rights, who are going to evaluate all the different emissions and potential damages. So stay tuned on that. But it does seem like the state, which is almost predominantly Republican run, seems to be generally for this. Spencer Cox, the governor, has come out and said that this is going to be something that they're going to do in stages. It's not, it's going to be a jobs creator. They're really spinning it. But for me, the standout with all of this was an interview that Kevin O'Leary did with Tucker Carlson recently
the new
over the
hero of
weekend.
democracy, apparently.
I mean, who would have thunk it? Tucker has found his wings and his halo, and he's really doing God's work from whatever weird podcast cabin set that he broadcasts from. But I think what's notable about this, they had a pretty combative exchange. And what really stood out to me was this idea that usually this argument between the billionaire trying to do this big thing that's going to fuck the environment over, that usually you're going to get lefty environmentalists coming at him. And the classic debate is environmentalists versus big billionaire capitalists. But Tucker took a very interesting tactic and came at him from the far right and was saying, why should taxpayers fund a Canadian billionaire with a project that is basically helping to wipe out the jobs and livelihood of the American working people? And I think that's a really fascinating existential, and not so existential because it's here. That is really the thing at hand with AI. I'm curious, what do you think of that debate, that argument, that question of why should the taxpayers fund big tech development for AI and for data centers?
Well, I think it's this kind of skewed message that yes, and by the way, the reason I will say that he brought up that is true across the board for a lot of these data centers in terms of why it's quote the taxpayers paying for it is because the companies are being offered tax incentives to build in the state. And so with tax incentives means that money that is now being not taxed from this new thing coming in, the taxpayer money is going to be used to subsidize whatever, is not being paid for by the taxes from that entity, aka the data center.
And a big portion of that is land. I mean, 40,000 acres.
Yeah.
If I wanted to go build a business, let's say I wanted to go build a movie studio,
Right.
I have to go buy those 40,000 acres
Right.
first.
Right.
I'm not just getting handed that by
And
the government.
I think that where it becomes convoluted is there's this whole argument that, oh, if we build these centers, you kind of alluded to this, it's going to it's going to create jobs. It's going to have all this construction workers needed. It's going to create tax revenue for the state. But then the question becomes okay, are those things that the state is willing to say are actually beneficial in contrast with the negative effects of these data centers? And B, other than maybe the construction workers that are literally getting a wage to build it, when you talk about billions of dollars in potential tax revenue for these states, what is that? There's no telling where that tax revenue is going to be going, right? That's at the hands of the state governments. And so we don't know if that tax revenue is going to be going to lowering the cost of healthcare, which people care about, lowering or creating more accessible education or childcare, which people care. Like there's no sort of saying, okay, it's going to create all this tax revenue, but like what actually is that going to go towards? And so I think that this whole argument that Tucker is making and then was pushing back on Kevin O'Leary about is like, I think that the economic argument of this is just like it's such a bellwether for the wealth being concentrated into the hands of the few at the expense of the many. And that is something that I think people have been feeling for a very long time about this stage of the American economy. But it sort of feels like for the first time in these data centers, we're seeing it play out in a way that is like so obvious. And I think these people, like these commissioners who voted for it, are maybe leaning on the argument that we do need tax revenue from this new business. I think there are people at the state government and federal government level who are obviously, as you said, talking about the need to do it to compete for national security, to be ahead of China. So there's all these arguments for it. But I think that when you talk to day-to-day people, those arguments don't hold water, no pun intended.
Yeah.
Is yes, those things might be important to us in the background of our lives, but they're not the things that are right in front of us, like the accessibility of water, the price of our electric bills, et cetera.
And Utah is in a drought. It is a very interesting state from a climate point of view because they have this unique Great Salt Lake, which has been at like all-time record lows. The state is in a drought, and yet it also is home to world-class skiing and snowfall. And, anecdotally, I can tell you that this past winter, as somebody who has property in Utah and skis in Utah, it was one of the record worst snow seasons, and
which contributed to the drought.
Which exactly. So all that snow melts at some point and has to go somewhere. Another little like side point on this, which I think will be very interesting to see, is Reed Hastings, who is obviously the co-founder or the founder of Netflix. Is he the sole founder of Netflix, or
I think he's the founder, but then Sarandos is like the co-head.
So, and he recently announced that he's stepping away, retiring. He is building a massive development out in he lives in Park City and is building in this area called Eden, Utah. No irony there, of course. And there's a famous ski mountain there that he is turning into basically a big private resort and development. And he's marketing it as really a kind of a Yellowstone type of place. This butts right up to Box Elder County.
Wow.
And Reed Hastings, of course, is a huge Democratic donor, very politically active here in Los Angeles and elsewhere. So I have my eye on him during all of this because he's certainly, first of all, from a business incentive standpoint, he wants to protect the climate there because he's building something that is climate that is very dependent on so I'm watching him in the O'Leary Stratos
billionaire v billionaire.
Yeah. But let's zoom out a little bit and like these data centers, now that we've got AI in basically everything, and that's not going away, and the demand for AI and the capabilities that we're pushing and advancing AI to do are only increasing exponentially. So what is the trend that we're seeing with these data centers across
so there's some
country?
Anthony isn't able to be with us today, so I'm going to take charge of the stat giving duties.
Oh, so then you're saying they'll be real and informed. Perfect. Great.
You don't trust him? Okay.
Sometimes I don't know where he gets his stats.
So there are currently about 700 data centers that are under construction and 3,000 that are already operational. Some of these 3,000 are on the smaller side. There's a couple that are massive. There's one, for example, in Louisiana that's one of the largest data centers in the world that primarily serves Meta, and residents in that area have complained already that drinking water is brown and rusty, and many of the residents are resorting to bottled water, which gives some pretty disturbing flashbacks to the crisis that happened in Flint, Michigan, which was for a totally different reason, but everyone saw how much that affected the community. So globally, $61 billion was invested in data center construction last year, 2025, and the US and Canada are responsible for $47 billion of that $61 billion. So US and Canada is really where the concentration of this construction is happening. And these data centers account for roughly half of all the new electricity demand in the United States.
That's unbelievable.
And since 2021, so in the last 5 years, power bills in the United States have risen about 40%. And so you have to think about AI. We all kind of became aware of AI, I would say, like winter 2022. So we know that there was already foresight in 2020, 2021 of needing to build these data centers to just create the very beginnings of our potential daily use of AI. So really that does coincide. That 40% rise in electricity costs coincides with the beginning of construction of data centers for artificial intelligence.
Wow.
A Gallup poll this month in May found that 7 out of 10 Americans oppose data centers being built near them, which is no surprise. And people say that they would rather live near a nuclear power plant than a data center, which is saying a lot.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
And we see that there's opposition happening both from voters and in politics from both parties. But kind of as you spoke about, there's definitely more strong opposition from Democrats who I think are, tend to sort of lean more on these environmental justice sort of arguments of these places. Whereas I think a lot of the Republican opposition to it is coming from that, of course, but is also coming from kind of a lack of regulation around the proliferation of AI in general, which we've seen from some people like Josh Hawley and actually Ron DeSantis, who I'll mention in a second. And so I think that like what is so interesting to me about all of this is that it's so clear that American citizens, voters, residents see the danger of these places, both up close, like the people who have brown drinking water in Louisiana, and from afar, like us who are reading news articles about it. However, there seems to be such a tilt in local governments, state governments, these boards, like you mentioned in Utah, towards development at all costs. And I think that there's going to be a turning point for this because in the past, I think when you talk about development at all costs, there's a lot of people who feel that is a really important part of the American economy. And they might, not love the reality of it, but they see it as a necessity. I wonder if the proliferation of data centers as they begin to impact not just the environment, but people's cost of living and quality of living, if this will be the thing that will kind of galvanize a new, I don't want to say generation because I think it's across all ages, but a new cohort of American people who will be vocal politically potentially for the first time in their lives. Because we're seeing a lot of these local meetings happen where people are coming out and complaining. And you got to believe that like you think about this place in Utah, that's a pretty sparsely populated county. You got to believe that a lot of those people are not like quote unquote political people, right? They're like ranchers, they're they're sort of just minding their own business as people do in rural America. And now suddenly it's like, hey, this is actually an issue that's going to galvanize us politically. And it doesn't seem to have as much of a partisan bend as other stuff does. So I'm curious to see where it's going to go.
I think we should acknowledge the political elephant in the room, which is that county is predominantly Trump voters. that is, and that is something that, and again, the state is as red as could be. They have a Republican governor. Blake Moore is a Republican. And so, these are people who have voted a certain way and are looking to those officials to help guide what's right for them and what's in their interests. And I think what is so clear to me, and I think where I think you're absolutely right that the frustration of people like that who are in that area, and wherever you live, if there's a data center that goes in there, I gotta believe that you feel pretty powerless. You're worried. You're seeing these things about, like, well, they built a data center over in XYZ and all the drinking water is brown. So is that going to happen here? And there is such a distrust in our institutions at the moment. So when a state commissioner says, "Oh, it's fine, don't worry about it," I think we're in an era, sadly, where we actually do still have to worry about it. Like, I don't think we can trust the
Well,
the officials who are saying, "Oh, it's going to be fine."
and to that point, people are fighting back, and they're fighting back politically. So there's some interesting opposition happening. There has been local opposition has blocked or delayed at least 16 data centers in 2025 that were worth a combined $64 billion. And this year, 2026, there are already more than 70 rejections or restrictions in the first few months of the year, which is more than all of
Wow.
2025. So the opposition is working.
Yeah.
People are coming to these meetings. They're standing up to these commissioners, these boards that are potentially voting for these data centers and saying, we don't want them here. And in some cases, they are winning that argument.
I don't know if you were going to talk about this at all, but I know that AOC has some legislation with Bernie.
Yeah, I got that. I got that coming for you.
Well, tell me all about the Artificial Intelligence Data Center Moratorium Act.
So
Did I get all that right?
That act would create a national moratorium on new AI data center construction until national safeguards are in place. And we've actually seen the first state enact its version of this, which is Maine, enacted a statewide moratorium on data centers requiring 20 megawatts or more. So you mentioned, I think there was 19 gigawatts is the one in Utah.
Yeah.
So that's humongous, right?
Huge.
But 20 megawatts is still significant.
Yeah.
And so until 2027. So this bill in Maine basically, or this law in Maine basically says that until 2027, no significant size data center can be built, so that we can have a council that has been created within the state study the impact on the grid and electricity of the state, environmental impacts of the states, and things like that. Similarly, in Florida, Ron DeSantis is calling for regulations, obviously very far right Republican, and that legislature dominated by Republicans has passed guardrails on water and energy uses of AI data centers. So we're seeing this happen on the state level. And what AOC and Bernie are proposing is a national moratorium. So they're basically saying we cannot build any new data centers until we study the effects. I think there are a lot of Democrats that would agree with them, probably some state Republicans who would agree with them, not a lot of federal Republicans who would agree with them. And unfortunately, it seems like this bill is not likely to even advance because Senator John Fetterman from Pennsylvania, who has been very newsy recently in siding with Republicans on a lot of different things, namely the Iran war and trying to take, the ability to be at war away from Trump, that he has actually said he agrees with Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, who said that a moratorium like this one that AOC and Bernie are proposing would be a, quote, surrender flag to China. And this leads me to my ultimate question, which is competition with China the most important thing here? Because I don't think it is. And I know that that is maybe eschewing national security issues potentially. But when you look at the impact on people's day-to-day lives, they're not thinking about China. And it bothers me a little bit that we have a federal government and state governments that are saying, oh, well, we know better. We know that China is actually the most important thing. And I would argue that most people know what the most important thing in their lives are. And right now, for most people, it's their health, their economic stability, and their ability to, live. And that kind of has nothing to do with China. So I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I mean, God, we could do a whole another hour on that question, I think. I kind of go back to the what I think are my personal core tenets of politics, which is we have to do the hard thing and do both things at once. And it's like, oh, well, that's illogical and that's costly and that's wasteful and that's time consuming. And yes, to all those things. But I think honestly, yes, it is critical that we make sure that we are not losing an edge to China. And yes, it is critical that we help preserve the environment of the Great Salt Lake and the ecosystem of that state. And we have to find a way to do both. And I think when I talk to people who are, so anti government spending and they're so anti big government and they want to fall back on all of these, capitalism principles of free market, let the private sector do this, do that. Well, the reason that Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos gets to have play dates in space is because the federal government wasn't trying to turn a profit when we created NASA and sent people to the moon.
Right.
And it is that, however seemingly reckless checkbook for R&D that the federal government has, that is the brilliance of the federal government. And I think, when what I would like to see, and obviously this is what we do here, is support young leaders. And the reason we support young leaders entering congressional races, Senate races, running for president, you name it, governor, you name it, is because their understanding of these critical new frontiers like AI is paramount, combined with the knowledge and the scientific data of, we can't have a place that is generating 19 gigawatts of energy. That is really bad. And so we have to figure out a way to do both those things, to compete with China and not lose to them, because I do think that there is they are an adversary and that is a real threat. But we also need to make sure that we have a planet
Yeah.
and that, people have clean drinking water and people have jobs. And I think I'd kind of answer your question by going back to the Tucker Carlson of it all and ask you, at what point should the government not be funding big tech, which is ultimately going to be wiping out people's jobs, without some sort of plan for that?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I think, unfortunately, that is I think it's a little bit of a contradictory hope, because I think that, at least when it comes to this issue of data centers, where we're at right now is that there isn't the ability of the federal government to keep up in terms of their research and understanding of the impact of these, and the ability to create regulation on the state and federal level. There's not the ability to keep up with the money and the development that is pouring into people's projects like the one from Kevin O'Leary and others. And so there's a tension between, do we create laws like the one that AOC and Bernie are proposing, or like the one that Maine has enacted, to stop people, very rich people, from building these things that they deem necessary economically and for international competition? Or do we not stop them? And do we suffer the consequences of that and try to clean up our mess as it's going, which I think we all know is kind of virtually impossible. And so I think that this is a really hard thing, because I think that for someone like you who is very conscious of national security and that international competition, I think it's a valid argument. But I think we're at a place in our country right now where the long term is not helping the everyday lives of people. And I think I come down on the side of like, I totally get that we need to make sure China isn't in control of this technology in the long run. But like, who gives a fuck if we don't have the ability as Americans to live our day-to-day lives with some sense of stability and safety, on a concrete level, not a kind of like, ethereal China spying on all of us level. And I think that, I mean, it's a little bit of a naive perspective because I know that that's all happening, right? Like they are spying on us. They are trying to beat us.
It seems like kind of what you're saying though is that it's like, absent a plan for my day-to-day, stop asking me to buy into the plan for the long term.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you're seeing so much opposition to this, because we've been living, I would say, for the last 10, 15 years in a world where things are increasingly difficult. So the only thing people can focus on is the day-to-day. And I think that is where we're really going to struggle, and hopefully have some politicians, like you said, be innovative and think about ways, because this is back to the thing I say about AI all the time, which is like, these people, state legislators, national, people in Congress, governors, these are the only people who have the actual ability to do something about this. Because the people like Kevin O'Leary and others who are making money off of it, they're not going to do jack shit, obviously. The media people who are reporting on it, even if they're very far in one direction or the other, they can't actually do anything about it. They can maybe try to sway public opinion, but ultimately that public opinion, the only way that it matters is if it affects the decisions of the people who we have elected to make decisions on our behalf. And so this is, to me, the data centers, the general conversation about AI, it lays in the hands of politicians. And it is the clear as day issue to me of politics affects all of us. Because if it's just running wild and we let, as you said, you let the free market just kind of do it all as we have in the past, it's been much harder to quantify in the past, but I think we're going to start to see it quantify now with this issue. And I just hope that there are people on both sides who can see that something needs to be done and they can come up with some sort of a plan. I don't know what it is, but.
Well, I'll drink to some sort of a plan. That's a start. Let's come up with some sort of a plan. Yeah. We'll meet back here next Monday with an idea.
We're going to come up with a plan.
Concepts? Are we going to do concepts of a plan?
We're going to have concepts of a plan. So don't hold us to too high of an expectation. All right. Well,
okay. Well,
if you guys are enjoying these conversations, make sure that you're following or subscribed wherever you're listening or watching. And why don't you leave us a 5-star review? Or a 4-star review if you have something that you want to complain about, and we'll read it and we'll try to address it. We're people of the people here at Political Playlist.
We don't address 3-star and below complaints.
We do not. No. Cheers.